March 2nd, 2026, Day 3. The bombs didn't stop. The missiles kept coming. And now Iran is hitting back. Not with fast boats, not with proxy forces, not with drones launched from Yemen or Iraq, with ballistic missiles fired directly from Iranian soil at American bases, at Israeli cities, at oil infrastructure across the Gulf. Tehran is retaliating with everything it has left, and the question that nobody in Washington answered before this started is now the only question that matters. What happens when Iran decides it has nothing left to lose? 4 American service members wounded at Udeid Air Base in Qatar. 2 Israeli civilians killed in Haifa by a Fateh 110 ballistic missile that penetrated Iron Dome coverage. A Saudi Aramco processing facility at Abqaiq, the single most important piece of oil infrastructure on the planet, struck by 3 Shahed 136 drones that came in low and fast from the northwest at 4:17 a.m. local time. Oil markets have not opened yet. When they do, analysts are predicting the largest single-day price spike since 1990. This is Day 3. This is what retaliation looks like. And this is why destroying a country's military is not the same as destroying a country's willingness to fight. Sunday, 4:17 a.m., Abqaiq, Saudi Arabia. The Abqaiq processing facility handles approximately 7% of global oil supply on any given day. It is the largest crude oil stabilization plant on Earth. It has its own Patriot missile batteries, its own radar coverage, its own security perimeter that extends 12 kilometers in every direction. 3 Shahed 136 drones crossed that perimeter at 4:17 a.m. They did not come from the Gulf. They did not come from Yemen. They came from the northwest, flying at 150 feet above the desert floor, below the radar horizon of the Patriot batteries covering the southern and eastern approaches. Their GPS navigation had been pre-programmed in a facility outside Avaz 3 weeks before the first American bomb fell on Tehran. The first drone struck the gas oil separation train on the facility's eastern side at 4:17 and 41 seconds. The second struck the crude stabilization tower 11 seconds later. The third drone, arriving from a slightly different vector, struck the main control building at 4:18 and 3 seconds. The fires that resulted were visible from the International Space Station. Saudi Aramco emergency shutdown protocols activated within 90 seconds. 7% of global daily oil supply went offline at 4:18 a.m. on a Sunday morning while most of the world's energy traders were asleep. They are not asleep anymore. To understand why 3 cheap drones were able to hit the most important oil facility on the planet, you have to understand what the last 2 days of American and Israeli strikes actually destroyed, and what they did not. Operation Epic Fury began Friday night with the most comprehensive opening strike package in the history of aerial warfare. American B-2 stealth bombers, F-35s from 3 carrier strike groups, Israeli F-35Is flying the longest combat missions in Israeli Air Force history. The targets were Iran's nuclear infrastructure, its ballistic missile launch sites, its air defense network, its command and control facilities, its Revolutionary Guard headquarters, its leadership compound. 48 senior officials killed in the first 18 hours. Supreme Leader Khamenei dead. Iran's air defense network degraded to approximately 30% of its pre-strike capability. 11 Iranian warships destroyed in the Persian Gulf. By every conventional metric of an opening strike package, Operation Epic Fury was the most successful aerial campaign since the Gulf War. But the Shahed 136 drone that hit Abqaiq's control building at 4:18 a.m. was not launched from a warship. It was not launched from a military airbase. It was launched from a flatbed truck parked behind a date palm grove outside Avaz that a KH-11 satellite had not identified as a military asset because it was not a military asset until 40 seconds before launch. That is the problem. That is the problem that 48 dead officials and 11 sunken warships did not solve. Sunday, 4:17 a.m., Al Udeid Air Base, Qatar. The largest American military base in the Middle East, home to the forward headquarters of U.S. Central Command, approximately 10,000 American service members, the base from which much of Operation Epic Fury's command and control has been coordinated for the past 60 hours. At 6:33, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps fires a coordinated salvo of 6 Fateh 110 short-range ballistic missiles at Al Udeid from launch positions in Iran's Fars province. The Patriot batteries covering Al Udeid intercept 4 of them, 2 get through. The first impacts a maintenance hangar on the base's eastern perimeter at 6:34 and 17 seconds. The explosion destroys two F-15E Strike Eagles undergoing scheduled maintenance and starts a fuel fire that takes 40 minutes to control. 4 Americans wounded, none are killed. By the arithmetic of missile warfare, the intercept was largely successful, but 2 ballistic missiles fired from Iranian soil penetrated Patriot missile defense at the most heavily defended American base in the Middle East. That is not an arithmetic problem. That is a demonstration. Iran's retaliation is not random, it is not desperate, it is a carefully constructed message delivered in 3 simultaneous languages. The Abqaiq strike says, "We can reach Saudi Arabia's economy even after you destroy our air force." The Udeid strike says, "We can reach American bases even after you destroy our air defense network." And at 7:14 a.m. Israeli time, a Fateh 110 ballistic missile launched from western Iran crossed 1,400 kilometers of airspace and detonated in a residential neighborhood in Haifa. Iron Dome intercepted 14 of the 15 missiles in the salvo. 1 got through. 2 Israeli civilians killed, a retired school teacher named Miriam Goldstein, 67, from Netanya, who was visiting her daughter in Haifa, and Ilan Katz, 34, a software engineer who was walking his dog on Moriah Boulevard when the missile hit the street 40 meters ahead of him. They were not military targets. They were not near military infrastructure. They were simply in Haifa at 7:14 a.m. on a Sunday morning when Iran demonstrated that it can still put a ballistic missile into an Israeli city, even with its air defense network at 30% of pre-strike capability. That is the third language of Iran's retaliation. It says, "We can still make Israelis die." And in Israeli political terms, that changes everything.
Sunday, 9:47 a.m., Jerusalem. Israeli Prime Minister's Emergency Security Cabinet convenes for the third time in 36 hours. The agenda has changed since the last meeting. At the previous meeting, the question was how deep to continue striking Iranian command and control targets, how far to pursue the decapitation of the Revolutionary Guard leadership, whether to strike the remaining nuclear enrichment facilities at Fordow, buried under 80 meters of mountain that only American GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators can reach. At this meeting, the question is different. 2 Israeli civilians are dead in Haifa. The Israeli public is watching. The Israeli government ran its entire military operation on the premise that offensive strikes would prevent Iranian retaliation from reaching Israeli soil. That premise failed at 7:14 a.m. when 1 missile got through. In Israeli political reality, 1 missile getting through is not an acceptable outcome. The cabinet is not debating whether to escalate. It is debating how much. Sunday, 11:22 a.m., Tehran. Inside what remains of Iran's functioning government infrastructure, the retaliation strikes are being managed from a facility that American intelligence has not located and Israeli aircraft have not struck. Not because the facility is sophisticated, because it is simple. A converted basement, commercial power, consumer-grade satellite internet routed through 3 separate proxy servers, a planning cell of 7 IRGC officers who have been operating on radio silence since Friday night. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps built its retaliation plan on a single assumption, that the United States and Israel would hit everything that looked like a military asset, every radar installation, every missile battery, every command and control facility with a military designation. So the retaliation infrastructure has no military designation. The Shahed drones that hit Abqaiq were stored in a commercial warehouse registered to a private agricultural company. The Fateh 110 launchers that struck Udeid were parked in civilian trucking compounds until 45 minutes before launch. The missile battery that put a warhead into Haifa operated from a position that Iranian civilian mapping showed as an orchard. Destroying Iran's military did not destroy Iran's ability to wage asymmetric war. It accelerated it. Because every conventional military asset that gets destroyed is an asset that no longer needs to be hidden. Every warship that sinks removes a responsibility. Every airbase that burns removes a constraint. What is left is lighter, faster, cheaper, harder to find, harder to target, harder to stop. Iran is not weaker on day 3 than it was on day 1. In asymmetric terms, it is more dangerous. Sunday, 2:18 p.m. Eastern Time. Energy markets have now been open for 6 hours in Asia and are preparing to open in Europe and the United States. Brent crude has hit $108.40 per barrel, up $23.70 from Friday's close. The Abqaiq facility, which has not resumed operations, handles 7% of global daily supply. Saudi Aramco has not provided an estimate for when operations will restart. The initial assessment is ongoing. Initial reports from engineers on site suggest the crude stabilization tower, the component struck by the second drone, sustained damage that will require a minimum of 14 days to repair. 14 days of 7% global supply disruption on top of a closed Strait of Hormuz. The International Energy Agency has activated its emergency oil release protocol for the third time in its history. The first was during the Gulf War. The second was during the Libya crisis. The third is now. Goldman Sachs released a note at 11:47 a.m. predicting Brent crude could reach $130 per barrel within 72 hours if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed and Abqaiq does not resume operations. $130 per barrel. The last time oil was at $130 a barrel, the global economy entered recession within 18 months. The American consumer has not felt the full price impact yet. Gas prices update daily. By Tuesday morning, the average American will pay approximately 60 cents more per gallon than they paid on Friday. By next weekend, if nothing changes, that number could be $1.40 more per gallon. President Trump launched Operation Epic Fury to eliminate Iran's nuclear threat and end its support for terrorist proxy forces. The American voter will experience it at the gas pump. Sunday, 4:55 p.m. Eastern Time, the Pentagon. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth addresses the press for the third time today. His previous two statements focused on operational success metrics: warships destroyed, air defense systems degraded, leadership targets eliminated. This statement is different. 4 American service members were wounded at Udeid this morning. We take every American casualty seriously, and we will hold those responsible fully accountable. Iran's retaliation attempts have been largely unsuccessful. Our forces are protected. Our operations continue. Iran should understand that every attack on American personnel will be met with a response that is disproportionate to what they can absorb. Disproportionate to what they can absorb. That phrase was not in the previous two statements. It means something specific. It means the targeting list is expanding. It means assets that were not struck in the first 2 days of Operation Epic Fury are now being added to the strike package. It means the question of whether to hit Fordow, the deeply buried nuclear enrichment facility that requires American munitions to destroy, is no longer a question. It is becoming an answer. Inside Iran, the retaliation strikes have done something that the American and Israeli planners did not fully anticipate. They have given Iran's government a narrative. For 2 days, the Islamic Republic has been on the receiving end of the most comprehensive aerial campaign in modern history. Its supreme leader is dead. Its navy is gone. Its air defenses are at 30%. Its leadership structure is in constitutional crisis. By every external measure, it is losing. But the Abqaiq fire is burning on every television screen in Iran right now. The Udeid strikes are being broadcast as evidence that Iran can reach American forces anywhere in the region. The Haifa missile is being described on Iranian state media as a message to the Zionist enemy that the resistance is unbroken. None of this is accurate as a military assessment, but military assessments are not what governments use to maintain the loyalty of populations under bombardment. What they use is narrative, and Iran's narrative right now is that it is fighting back, that it is hurting the enemy, that resistance is not futile. That narrative is keeping the Revolutionary Guard cohesive. That narrative is keeping the Basij deployed. That narrative is the most important military asset Iran has left. And 3 drones and 2 ballistic missiles bought it another day. In Washington, the political consequences are accelerating. A CNN poll released Sunday afternoon shows 31% of Americans support continued military operations against Iran, up 3 points from Saturday's Reuters poll, but still below every major military operation the United States has conducted since the Korean War. More significantly, 58% of Americans now say they are very concerned or extremely concerned about the economic impact of the conflict. That number was 41% on Friday before the markets opened. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut issued a statement Sunday afternoon. The administration told us this was a surgical operation to eliminate Iran's nuclear capability. We are now on day 3 with American bases under ballistic missile attack, the world's most important oil facility on fire, oil approaching $110 per barrel, and no plan that anyone in this building has seen for what happens next. That is not a surgical operation. That is a war, and wars require congressional authorization. The White House has not responded to the authorization question directly in any of today's 3 press briefings. That silence has its own meaning.
Sunday evening, Moscow. Russian President Vladimir Putin convened an emergency session of Russia's Security Council at 6 p.m. Moscow time. The meeting lasted 3 hours and 40 minutes. No statement was released immediately after it concluded. At 10:47 p.m. Moscow time, the Kremlin released 4 sentences. Russia condemns in the strongest possible terms the illegal aggression against the sovereign state of Iran. Russia has activated consultations with its strategic partners regarding appropriate responses to this unprecedented escalation. Russia's military assets in the region have been placed on heightened alert status. Further announcements will follow. Heightened alert status. Russia has military assets in the region, naval vessels in the Mediterranean, air defense systems in Syria, intelligence infrastructure across the Middle East that feeds information to Iranian commanders, cyber warfare capabilities that have not been deployed in this conflict. Heightened alert status means those assets are now actively postured. It does not mean war with Russia. It means the conflict that started as a strike on Iran's nuclear program is now touching the edges of a confrontation between the United States and a nuclear-armed permanent member of the UN Security Council. That is day 3. So, here is what is true at the end of day 3. The United States and Israel executed the most comprehensive opening strike in modern aerial warfare history. 48 Iranian officials dead, 11 warships sunk, air defenses degraded, nuclear sites struck. The opening strikes were real and their effects were real. And Iran struck Abqaiq, struck Udeid, struck Haifa, seized an LNG carrier, closed the Strait of Hormuz, kept its asymmetric infrastructure operational, maintained its narrative of resistance, and pushed Russia's military assets to heightened alert. Operation Epic Fury was designed to end Iran's threat in 72 hours. 72 hours have passed. The threat is different now. It is not the same threat. The warships are gone. The air defenses are degraded. The leadership is in crisis. The conventional military capability has been systematically destroyed. But the Shahed drones are still flying. The ballistic missiles are still launching. The strait is still closed. Abqaiq is still on fire. And oil is at $108 a barrel and rising. The question is not whether Operation Epic Fury succeeded in its opening phase. It did. The question is what Phase 2 looks like, what Phase 3 looks like. Who governs Iran if the regime collapses? Who controls the nuclear materials? Who stops the asymmetric infrastructure that has no address and no headquarters and no flag that can be sunk? Nobody in Washington has answered that question publicly, because the honest answer is complicated. And complicated answers are hard to give when oil is at $108 a barrel and American bases are being hit with ballistic missiles, and 2 Israeli civilians died walking their dog in Haifa on a Sunday morning. So, here is the question. Day 3. American bases hit. Abqaiq on fire. Oil at $108. Russia on heightened alert. Iran still fighting. Was this the cost that was worth paying to eliminate Iran's nuclear program? Or did Operation Epic Fury remove the conventional threat and unleash something more dangerous, more dispersed, and harder to stop than the warships and missile batteries it destroyed? Drop your answer in the comments. Every major capital is asking this right now, and nobody has a clean answer. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of day 3 beyond the headline numbers, hit like. Subscribe for every development at this level. The strikes, the retaliation, the economics, the diplomacy, the people who are not coming home. And share this with someone who thought this would be over in 72 hours, because day 3 just proved it is not. Day 3. American blood, Iranian fire, and a war that is larger on Sunday evening than it was on Friday night.